Hi, everyone. Welcome. So this is the first in a series of these things that I'm going to be doing. Those of you that have been following me will know that I've been talking about this issue around the conflict of rights between biological women and transgender women. This has been a topical thing. This is one of the issues that I heard when I went to the Let Women Speak rally recently. I know that this has all been blown out of proportion and people are talking about, all of these crazy things, and everyone seems to want to talk about everything except for the issues involved. And the first person that I'm going to introduce you to in a moment actually has been caught up in a situation that is almost an ideal case study of this conflict of rights. And I'll introduce you to her now. Her name's Sall Grover. She's the CEO of Giggle. Thank you so much for joining us today, Sall. Really great to see you.
Thanks so much, David. Thanks for talking to me and talking about this issue. It is very important. And I know there's so many women in Australia who appreciate that there is a platform where a conversation is happening.
So I suppose the first thing, tell me about Giggle and your company, and what does your company do, and how did you get dragged into all of this that's been happening?
So the Giggle is a women's only social networking app. The idea for it came in 2018, in a conversation between my mom and I. I'd moved back from America and I was telling her stories about how I tried to find rooms to rent in New York, and I'd used all the different platforms, and there'd be guys that would be like, oh, you can live here rent free if you walk around naked, or do you want a boyfriend as well? Just like, just sleazy, gross stuff. And I was very much like, can there just be one area in a woman's life where we don't have to deal with this? I'm just trying to find somewhere to live. And so it was my mom who had the idea of like, what if we did like a roommate app that was just for women so they could avoid that stuff? And I was like, what a great idea. So we started developing it, and it sort of grew into all the more things that we offer on the app, whether like freelance work, and then just like a space to connect, and lesbian dating and all this sort of stuff, and just to chat, all sorts of things. And then before we'd even launched, we were just doing testing on the App Store and Google Play. And we woke up on the 7th of February, 2020, to just inundated with accusations of transphobia from media, from what felt like to me, every person on the internet. I'm talking thousands. The app itself was under attack. We didn't have all of our security in place for it yet, because as I said, we were just doing testing. And I've never been hateful of a demographic in my life. It was nothing I've ever been accused of. And so I was mortified that I was being accused of being transphobic. And so I was like, immediately, my instinct was, I have to find out what's going on here. And so I just started Googling things, and I just found like places on the internet where women were speaking about a conflict between women's rights and the rights of what are called, could be called trans women, or trans-identified males, or men who claim to be women.
I'm not going to language police you. That's fine. You use whatever language you feel comfortable with.
So I started to read what these women were saying, and I was comparing it to what trans activists were saying, and then I was also comparing it to what was being said in the media. And it did not take long at all to realize that what these women were saying was not a word of a lie. That basically we are being not just told, demanded to accept that any man who claims to be a woman is a woman. And if you question that, or you do anything that is in opposition to that, you are immediately called transphobic. So I walked blindly into this, and then I was like, well, it's too important not to speak up on. So I didn't realize what was going on. I've now spent the better part of 3 and a bit years now educating myself every single day. I mean, this consumes your life once you know what's going on.
So what was the action that you took that led to the accusations against you of transphobia?
So when we were developing how to do an app just for women on the internet, we had to be like, how would you actually have that? because, obviously the internet is just really like, it's the Wild West in a way. Anyone can use anything, which is great. But then there are certain times where you want to create something just for a certain group of people. Now, this is not a new concept. For example, the gay male dating app Grindr, when it first started, was exclusively just for gay males. It now has expanded, and it's now more of a queer community app. Look, that's their right. It's their business. They can run it how they want. But when it first started, it was exclusively for males. Now, they didn't need to gatekeep that, because women and straight men just stayed away from it. There was no problem with it. We knew with an app for women that wouldn't be the case, because we were creating it because there's a type of man you want to be away from, and that's just the type of man who would potentially try to get onto it. And I'm just talking about just a man in general, not any identity or anything, just a sleazy man. So what we did is we found that there is a sort of an AI program. Like, I didn't invent this. It's a thing that you use, that you pay to use it in your platform, where basically someone takes a selfie when they're onboarding. The AI assesses whether it's male or female, and then we always had a human being in the background just making sure that was working as it should. So that's where the accusation of transphobia took on a new life. Now, when we were developing it, we actually were going like, this is really cool, because it's, the least controversial way you could do it, because in all of human history, we've all just known that, you can just tell someone's a man or a woman by looking at them. So it was basically just doing what the human eye does, but in a digital way. And I was like, how fantastic that they've done that. And, it's technology, so nothing works 100% or as good as the human eye. So we used the onboarding technology. We had it set to 94% accuracy. With testing, we found that was the best way to do it. We found that we would rather all women be always permitted onto the platform, and that if a man did actually happen to get through, it would be easier to just remove him. I'd rather remove a man than, say, knock back a woman, if you get what I mean, if there was ever any sort of blurred lines. Keep in mind, I was doing this unaware of what was happening. So that's basically where the controversy came from. But as I mentioned,
so just to be clear, you'd never been involved in this sort of politics. You'd never been involved in this sort of thing at all. So you were just a entrepreneur wanting to develop an application that you saw a gap in the market for, and you were going about it, and then you just sort of stumbled into this massive controversy.
Like life-changing, because once you're like labeled as this horrible transphobic bigot, I mean, it sticks. And then, as the time has gone on, they, because I've just kept speaking up about it, I haven't backed down, then they'd try and do other accusations like, oh, you're racist as well. I mean, these are all horrible things to say from my end, easily disprovable. But if no one wants to listen to you disprove them, but I mean, they also have real consequences. Like when we were getting the accusations of transphobia and then later racism, like both Google and Apple actually contacted us to find out if that was the case. And we had to prove that it wasn't, because you have to get onto the App Store and Google Play. There are laws and rules you have to follow. And so they take those allegations seriously. So we had to prove, and we could easily prove that both of these things were incorrect. And so within 5 minutes, and they were like, okay, cool, like carry on, like no problem. But no media that's made the accusation wants to then go and write the story of, oh no, false alarm, they're not transphobic or racist. So you just sort of stuck with it. And so when people say, oh, cancel culture doesn't exist, I'm always like, are you kidding me? I've been living it for 3.5 years. It very much exists. Yeah.
And so for the benefit of people watching, I think there's two key rights that are engaged here, maybe three. The firstly is property rights. So Sal, you own your application. It's your property. It's your intellectual property. It could be a physical space if it was a different circumstance, like a club or a business or whatever. But then secondly, you have the issue around freedom of association. Now, our party is very big supporters of freedom of association. And effectively what that means is that you should be able to choose who you associate with or don't associate with in your own private spaces on whatever terms you feel are appropriate for that situation. Now, it sounds to me like you have decided with your property, which is the Giggle app, that you wanted to have exercise your freedom of association to ensure that only women, which you considered were only biological women, would have access to that space. And the conflict here, as I see it, and this is a conflict not just with your app, but in many different women's spaces, the conflict here is that transgender women also saying, some of them, not all of them, but some of them are saying, well, we want access to that space at all because what you're doing is, bigoted and transphobic and whatever. But I suppose from our point of view, I just see it as you exercising your freedom of association as you see fit with your property. And that's the conflict here, right? And it's
one of many,
really, yeah, one of many. And I asked about this conflict. We spoke about this earlier off camera because I was trying to, distill down what are the issues here. And so I asked the government, the Minister for Equality herself, are there ever conflicts between the rights of biological women and transgender women? And you told me that you saw that exchange. What did you make of that, what the government said?
Well, either the government, who is insisting that trans women are women, either they don't know the issues, or they do, but they don't want to admit to them. So either they're quite ignorant or they're inept. Both are really dangerous realities. Because up until very recently, no one would have ever said that there was any conflict between or any confusion over whether somebody was a male or a female or a man or a woman. We've all lived, our lives understanding this very, very clearly. I mean, children understand it, pets understand it. But then suddenly something has changed in the zeitgeist, and now this is one of the biggest issues. And you've got evolutionary biologists who are the smartest minds on this having to sit and do interviews telling people that no, humans can change sex, and it must be hideously boring for them, but it's become the most important thing they can say right now. So you've got a situation where the government is going to say, no, there's absolutely no problem here. Well, of course, they have to say that because they implemented the laws that say any man can identify into a woman's space. So to admit that they're wrong is not something that we're used to politicians doing. So I wouldn't expect them to do it on this issue. But they are wrong because men aren't women, and there is a conflict. Because even if it was just one woman that actually had a problem with it, thankfully, it's many, many women who are raising their voice. But even if it was actually just one woman that had a problem with this and everybody else was fine with it, it would be almost even more important to listen to that one woman, because she is speaking a truth that is against the grain, and she's actually the only one saying it. And she might have a reason of why she doesn't want a male person in a space that is deeply personal to her. I've experienced it myself where I've needed a break from male energy, male presence, like in my life, because even the male energy can just be quite confronting, because I've had a male violence situation and I've recovered, I've done the work, I've recovered from it, and then I'm fine. Lots of women have those sorts of stories. So to say that women don't have a choice of whether there can be a man in sort of intimate spaces, whether it's bathroom, change rooms, rape shelters, domestic violence shelters, these really serious places. But then also, like, say for me, an app where it's actually just a fun place. If you take that right away from women, you're taking a huge right. You're taking that right of assembly, but you're also taking that right of belief. So the government is actually just wrong on this. What they also quite often do is they'll have a woman politician be the one saying, oh, there's no conflict here, I'm cool with it.
It was in this case, certainly, yeah.
It was, yeah. Now, this ideology, gender ideology, wouldn't work if there weren't some women out there saying this is what's going on. saying this is what I agree with. Like I think trans women, I've got no problem with it. It requires some women to believe it. I'm always really reluctant to turn it into any sort of inter-woman war, because I think that the only people who will lose there are women. The issue is over here. And look, at the end of the day, in terms of what we're saying, freedom of assembly, freedom of belief, any woman can believe whatever she wants. If you want to believe that men are women and that makes you get out of bed better in the morning, believe it. I don't care. Just don't make me believe it. And at the moment, there are laws in place that say you have to believe it. And what's astonishing is that so few people actually know that it's happened. But it's not the fault of the people that they don't realize that it's happened, because usually when huge, big, important laws changed, we all do actually know about it. To give one that's kind of in the same realm in terms of including the LGBTQ+I community was gay marriage. Now, as a society, gay people were made to basically beg to be able to be legally recognized, which is horrible and unforgivable. It went to a national plebiscite. Thankfully and rightfully, we got gay marriage in. That didn't happen with trans rights. The rights have been put in without anybody knowing them. They've taken the definition of woman out of the Sex Discrimination Act. They put gender identity.
So this is a federal act we're talking about.
That's federal. That's federal, yeah. In Victoria, they put in self-ID laws that say any man can legally self-ID as a woman and go and change his birth certificate and be legally a woman in a day. This all happened without anybody knowing about it. And so now we actually have to roll back those laws and make laws that work for both women and the trans community. Because at the moment, we've only got laws that work for the trans community. So when they say that they're the most, oppressed, marginalized group, this is just not true. They've managed to be able to get laws changed in stealth.
And like I've noticed myself, like the change and suppression practices bill that went through in Victorian Parliament not long ago. This is relating to different but related issues. There was public debate, but the public debate was all around the headline issue and not the details. And I think a lot of these things, when they're brought up in public debate, they present them in such a way that if you question it, you're a bigot or a transphobe or you're a homophobe or whatever, when really people are concerned about the rights of all. Like I'm concerned about the rights of all, and it sounds like you're concerned about the rights of all and not dealing with these conflicts. You mentioned before, Sal, that this has like been life-changing for you. Like, how has it changed your life?
Well, in a few different ways. Now I have some kind of notoriety in the country for saying women don't have a penis, which is just, to me, the stupidest possible thing someone could be known for.
But you didn't dream of that when you were growing up.
I literally just, I did a master's degree at university. I got educated and this is where it's at. But here we are. So having to speak out about this and get called different names and whatever. I mean, it's water off a duck's back essentially at this point. But we all have families. We all, there's all repercussions, and there can be really, really, really scary times. I'm not someone who used to ever receive death threats on a regular basis. I do now because I say women don't have a penis. And then also professionally, like as I said before, people say that cancel culture doesn't exist. It 100% does. My company was canceled before we'd even launched. We had to scramble and keep going. Now, I've got investors. We're a startup, and we were just sort of called transphobic. No mainstream media, of the media that you would have thought would talk to us after then. Like beforehand, before that accusation had happened, when we were making all of the relationships and getting ready to launch and talking to media, they were all like, this is amazing. This is like a slam dunk for our audiences. We're so excited. We're so excited to do what we can to help and support you. The moment I was accused of being a transphobe, no one would respond to me anymore. And so you become terrified. But I was put in a position where I had no choice. I was like, I have to fight this. For like my own sort of personal selfish reasons. But then when I found out what was going on, I was like, on just a social, societal level, I can't let this slide. Like, we have to speak up about it. And in 2020 in Australia, let me tell you, there weren't that many people who were speaking up about it. I was making connections in the UK and the US long before anybody in Australia was paying that much attention to it. So the tide has definitely turned, and so many more people are realizing. So everything is moving in a much better direction. And which is the ideal thing, because, you know, we've had all this no debate and silencing of people. But the moment we can actually have conversations, we can stop this sort of horrible war that's happening and make a society that actually is more diverse and inclusive of everybody. Because right now it's not. It's a superficial idea that it is, but it isn't. Because if you say that any woman who speaks out about her rights is transphobic, you're not in a diverse and inclusive society. It's nonsense.
It's interesting as well for me. Like, your app is not it's not something that people need in their daily life, right? Like, it's not like a toilet or something, some of these other things that people talk about. And if someone wasn't happy with the way that your app was structured or the way that you're exercising your freedom of association, the free market response would be to just set up a competitor app that had different rules and go into competition with you, right? And say, well, yeah, I mean,
completely. Like, my thing, I say it all the time, like, set up a trans woman plus women app. Like, that is like, this is what we are. We're women plus trans women. Okay. I mean, I'm not probably going to use it, but there will be women who do. If there's a market for it, create it. I'm not going to demonize anyone. I mean, there are so many apps on the App Store and Google Play exclusively for trans people. I mean, I would never, ever try and go onto them. I respect that that's not for me. It sort of just baffles me that it's just this one thing, but it is. When you're dealing with something that is just for women, and then suddenly there's men saying that they're women, it is unlike anything else. A lot of people, if people are just sort of starting to ask questions about what's going on, and then one of the things they might notice is that it's quite often, you know, trans women are women, and it's women fighting back against this, but the trans men are quite forgotten. It's not as hostile on that side of it. And there's a lot of reasons for that. The first one being is no one is being forced to believe that trans men are men. They didn't lead with that for a very specific reason. Men aren't going to believe that these young girls, or there's very few middle-aged women doing it. It's mostly young girls, but these young girls are actually men. No one would sort of have the audacity to try and force a man to believe that. It's interesting that in gender ideology, you see how different sexes actually are, both good and bad, and how we're treated in society. It actually highlights it more than anything I've ever seen. One of the issues was also sport, for example. No one has ever questioned of whether men are physically stronger and can run faster, because the evidence is just always there. I mean, the greatest female sprinters of all time cannot compete with Usain Bolt. They can't compete with the men who lost to Usain Bolt. It doesn't mean that they're worse athletes. They're the best female athletes in the world. We're just different. Our bodies are different. And now we're being told, forget that. Not even something you have to care about. If this man says he's a woman, in you go. Until I started researching all this, I actually didn't realize that the male category in sport is actually effectively an open category. If a woman is good enough, she could compete in it. There's a reason why it doesn't happen. The female category of sport was created so specifically so women could compete, and that's just being dismantled.
Yeah, it's certainly another issue, and like, sport is very complex as well, because it depends on the sport, right? Like, I used to do archery, and your gender doesn't really confer any particular advantage, and it's quite common to have
heard
mixed
that it
competitions.
Does. So there's some sports where there is mixed competitions, right?
Yeah.
And that's fine. Like, if there's sports where there's mixed competitions, all the athletes, they train specifically for that. They know what they're getting into, blah, blah, blah. That's you having a choice there. But there are certain things. Men and women do have different depth perceptions and things like that. You know, it's like it is interesting also the sports where it is happening. And then you think like some things like, say, ballet, for example. It's not like suddenly they're being like, oh, let's have like the girls lift the guys and dance around and have them do different things. It's ballet is something so sex specific because the bodies are so different and so relevant to that performance that there's no possible way you could change them. And so it's just funny seeing where like it's just things where it sort of looks similar. So I will give it a shot. Like, and I just think about it all the time that of the women that are currently missing out, but the women that we wouldn't know about had this already been happening. Like, if one of like just the top 200 tennis players in the world, like just a relatively mediocre male tennis player, if 15 years ago one of them had been like, or 20 years ago had been like, you know what, actually I'm a woman and this was all, what was happening now is happening then, and then he went in to tennis, we wouldn't have Serena Williams. That career would not have happened. And so it's just having to remember, trust your instincts. Everything that you knew before this, it was all true. It's not like we've been lied to for hundreds and thousands or millennia and it's like, oh, we've got it all wrong. No, everything was true. This is false.
And so you spoke about the issue around the bad publicity that your company received because they decided you were transphobic and they were going to cancel you. What's happening with Giggle at the moment?
So, well, two things. One, I will preface by saying Giggle's actually been down since August last year. We're renovating it. Basically, because we've just been treading water and trying to work out what to do and spent the last 3 years learning a lot about the world, but also the startup and tech world and what our user base really wanted. We had a situation where we either had to do big updates because it had been 3 years, or implement what we wanted. And when you're a startup, you're working with limited funds, you've got to make decisions. So we made the decision to actually take it down for a while. It still actually is there. We've left the shell of it on the App Store and Google Play for the carcass is there for the sharks to circle, but it doesn't function at the moment. We're getting ready to launch the new one that will function. It will be available on the App Store, not on the App Store and Google Play anymore. It'll be available online, like on computer and smartphone, from a website. We had advice to get it off the App Store and Google Play. The reason being is that it is becoming, for lack of a better phrase, more woke, and that it would, as the company grew, it was a huge possibility and risk that they would cancel it. And we didn't want to put ourselves in that situation because that's part of the stuff that we've learned. We wanted to have control over it. So at the moment, it actually is not a platform that you can go and use. So then the other part of it is I am being taken to federal court on this issue of a male who wants access to it because I, obviously have said no. And there's context in it in the sense that, thousands upon thousands of men tried to access the app. I'd actually go as far to say more males tried to access the app than we had women users, which, is like depressing in and of itself. But, I think that there's two reasons for that. One, because we got such bad publicity that we were transphobic. And so they all came after us. And so it was just like thousands upon thousands of men. And there'd be certain attacks that would happen, one a month, and you'd be this like 4-day period of it just being inundated with males trying to get onto it. So one male trying to get onto it and being banned from it was not it was just a daily experience for me. But there is one who has decided that that they have a right to be on it, and taking us to court for that. So I can't obviously say much about it because we are in litigation with it. But what I can say is anything that I would say sitting in a courtroom anyway, which is, men aren't women. And as I've said earlier, if you want to believe that they are, that's your right. But you can't force me to believe that as well, or to have actions that, go against every instinct that I have. Freedom of belief, I thought was a thing. And this is part of it as well, in terms of freedom of belief, where I say that, obviously I come at this as a woman's rights issue. And female spaces are the things that so many women are fighting for, and it's the most immediate sort of thing for a lot of us. But for all of society, this is an issue. We all have freedom of belief. Even trans people have freedom of belief. And any man should also be allowed to acknowledge the biological sex of the person standing in front of him. It doesn't always matter in life whether someone's male or female. And as we progress as a society, it does matter less and less, and that's fantastic. But there are times when it is relevant, and that can be with female spaces, with sport, with dating, with our romantic relationships. Biological sex is the first most relevant thing. So if we don't, as a society, have that right to not believe something, especially something that's not true, or is a sort of a faith-based belief system, then we're not living in a free society. So, you know, while I'm fighting for female-only spaces, hopefully sort of the benefit in doing that, it just makes people see and put two and two together and go, hang on, this actually does affect me in my life as well. Even if I'm someone who doesn't use female-only spaces, I do like freedom of belief, and I think that's a healthier society having it.
Yeah, I mean that's I can't disagree with that. Yeah. I mean, freedom of belief is actually something that you put to me when we had a conversation on the phone the other day, and I hadn't considered it in that context, but certainly it's a real thing, right? People need to be able to be free to believe what they want about the world and the reality that they're presented with, and how and choose how they interact with that reality.
Completely. And it's also, you know, the Let Women Speak event that you went to, this would have been spoken about a lot. Like women are having to tell stories of the worst things that have ever happened to us in an attempt to try and justify female-only spaces. And obviously, having males in female-only spaces is a safety issue. But I don't even need to make that argument, I don't think. Like when I'm talking to people about it, I don't need to go there. Basic truth either matters or it doesn't. A female-only space is a female-only space. They were never like female-only spaces and the good guys. They were just female-only spaces because that is, you know, there's rules in society. That's how it works. It's how we worked out that was the best way to make society function. We can have all these little places where we go for a refuge, and then we exist in this colorful world together. It's not, as some trans activists do try to compare the need for female-only spaces to some sort of racial apartheid, thinking that
yes, I've heard that a number of times, like comparing it to it's apartheid hideously
offensive to anybody who has or is living in racial apartheid. This is not that. We're talking about the choice to be able to go into a female-only space because you either want to or you need to. That's it. And if the concept of female-only spaces like just makes you really, really angry, all the more reason for you to not be in it. You know what I mean? The men who would never even think of going into a female-only space are ironically probably the safest men to be in one. But they don't go in. So it just, female-only spaces and sport was not a controversial issue. The only reason these are controversial issues now is because there are men who are wanting to be in them. That's all. And you can think those men are women if you want. That's fine. But you cannot deny that the basis of the controversy is because there is a male in the room.
Yeah, it's like it brings us back to like the standard of debate and discussion around this. I mean, I've been pretty disappointed with how all this has happened, like the Let Women Speak thing that's happened. Really the media and everyone was talking about everything except for what the women wanted to talk about. I thought it was so crazy that in Melbourne, like these group of women wanted to talk, and I was there to witness it. Across the road, there was a group of, trans rights activists screaming at them to try and shut them down. Then this group of about 20, apparently they turned out to be Nazis, came along, and it's like everyone was saying something except for the women that came there to say their bit, and the media didn't report on it at all.
Dude, it's so crazy. I've never seen people so desperate for a group of people to be Nazis. People are desperate for these women to be Nazis. It's like they need us to be Nazis. We're not. I mean, if you actually think that Nazism was the fight for female-only spaces, you have been grossly and offensively misinformed of what Nazism is. Those men were not there to support women. They were there because of a media opportunity and to derail what the women were saying. They knew it would take the focus off. Do you think that they support that? They actually aided in silencing women. They were not pro us. We have no affiliation with these people. But how excited people have been that they turned up. I mean, you had Antifa at the Melbourne rally, anti-fascists, and the fascists turned up and nothing happened. They still focused on the women. It's just mind-blowing. I mean, I think that I will also say the only place that the Nazis turned up, and if we accept that they were Nazis, it seems that that's at least what they call themselves. And they did the offensive salute. So I would say only someone who is actually a Nazi would do it. But the only place they turned up was in Melbourne. And they have turned up to a few other events in Melbourne over the last few years, I've been told. They didn't turn up anywhere else. To me, that says in Victoria, there's a Nazi problem. This is not women's responsibility. Go and deal with your Nazi problem.
Yeah, it's it's like these women were being held responsible for the actions of a group of men. Like, I mean, it's just outrageous.
I keep saying it, and I say it with Moira deeming what's happened with her. And I'm like, women are being held responsible for a group of men invading a women's event about the fact that we don't want men invading women's spaces. I mean, if anyone would listen to us, they would realize we couldn't say this better ourselves. I mean, our point is just constantly being proven. But the media reaction to it has been disgusting. And then, we saw the result. What happens when you're going around saying these things about women? We saw what happens in Auckland. What happened with Kelly J. Keane? That mob. And again, Antifa didn't react that way to actual Nazis showing up, but they reacted that way to women because the gender ideology movement is fundamentally very anti-woman. I mean, I'm at the point where I'm reluctant to call them trans activists because I do think that is an insult to good people. I think that they should be called anti-women activists because that's what they are in every way, shape, or form, every step of the way. They're just anti-women.
One of the things that I've noticed, and it's been quite puzzling to me, I was quite concerned about speaking about this issue because I've seen how people like yourself have been treated when they've spoken about this issue. I wanted to make sure that I understood the issues, to the best of my ability within this framework. They don't seem to come after men.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I mean, I haven't had mobs of people giving me death threats and yelling.
No
and
rape threats.
At me.
None
None at all. No one's threatened any of these things to me, and I don't want them to, and I hope they don't. But I speak to women like yourself who speak up about this, and they tell me the sorts of threats and horrible, absolute, things I wouldn't repeat that they've had said to them, and I'm like, my goodness, this is absolutely outrageous. What's happening to these people?
Yeah,
these women, not people. They're women.
No, yeah, it's the giveaway that they know they can tell the biological sex. It's the act. They don't realize they're giving the game away. They know which ones are men and which ones are women. You can tell by how they treat you differently. I mean, you're probably not going to get a rape threat. I am.
I hope not.
Yeah, they're not nice. Trust me.
Yeah, but, I don't doubt it for a second.
So, as I said before, I mean, these activists prove constantly, and gender ideology in general proves constantly that there not only are there differences in men and women, there's differences in how men and women are treated, and it's only being highlighted more and more. And it's not like before gender ideology came along that everything was like honky-dory. There was still always problems. We're probably the best place we've ever been in society. I never walked around thinking I'm an oppressed person. I will say that I was definitely raised to, I was raised to thinking you can do whatever you want, blah, blah, blah. And I did go out into the big wide world and found that there were some men who were like, well, we'll see about that. Sit down. No, you won't do whatever you want. And so that's sort of like what influenced me creating an app for women. Long story, but that's like sort of how it got there. But I didn't lead with that, like that, oh, I'm this like poor, disadvantaged woman or anything. I was just like, I'm educated, I'm able, I've got ambitions, let's go and do it. Now I'm going like, well, you've actually changed laws that take actual rights away from me. And so if we're going to talk about a really disenfranchised group right now, it's actually women. Because if women aren't in the Sex Discrimination Act, if woman is not clearly defined in the Sex Discrimination Act, where does that leave women? And also, who the hell are you identifying as? Which is this mythical feeling, apparently. So what if you can't define a woman, how can you define a trans woman? And if you can't define a trans woman, why am I expected to allow this person into my woman's only space? You've just diluted every word. Nothing has any meaning. Like, yay for anarchy.
It's like a lot of this. We've in my office we've had lots of discussions about what woke is, and one of the outcomes is the destruction of language in many ways, and this is a perfect case of that. But
which is why, just quickly on the language thing, that's why, like I said, the Let Women Speak event was so important and so aptly named, is because part of the thing is women want to be able to speak in a clear language about what we want and who we are and what the specific needs for women are. Like, there just are differences. It would be great if there were none. Like, I don't love that men are stronger than us. That actually makes me sad. I wish that men and women were as strong as each other. It would solve a hell of a lot of problems in the world, but we're not. So we have to play with the hand we've been dealt. And at the moment, we're trying to make up absolutely bizarre rules that only benefit men. And yes, it's some women who are pushing this, but it's not the first time that women have pushed something against their own interests. I do compare some women who are for this ideology to women who didn't want the right to vote. Because it's the only way I can compare it. There were women who didn't want the right to vote, and now there's women who don't want women's rights. And it's like, okay, cool, but I'm sure once we get them for you, you'll use it.
It's an interesting point. So before we finish up, like, this debate has gotten really toxic. I feel like something's happened though recently. Like, what do you think needs to happen from here to get back to some sort of discourse? I mean, I said earlier what I think I'd like, I'd like to see happen is people at least acknowledge that there's conflicts and talk about how we manage solutions to those conflicts. I'd be interested to hear, like, what do you think needs to happen to fix some of these issues?
I think, first of all, just on like a real micro level, if you are a person who, say, if you're listening to this, or you're someone who's just been sort of seeing in the background that maybe there's something happening, do some research on it. And then once you realize what's going on, actually just talk to some other people in your life. Like, the more people who know what's going on in reality and with facts, the better. And then on the other side of it, it is talking to MPs. It is talking to people in positions that we can hopefully get some movement on laws of being like, okay, so we do have a demographic over here that we need to cater to, and that's fine. Every single person in the world should be represented under the law and fairly. But is it fair that men get to self-ID as women? Well, I would argue it's not. And the problem is that women have never been able to have a discussion about that in any meaningful way and be listened to. And we're having discussions about it ourselves all the time, but we haven't been listened to on it. And so if we could get to a place where there was really great, rigorous, in-depth public debate on this issue, I think it would really change the zeitgeist on it, that we wouldn't have this horrible, violent mobs trying to stop women from speaking. That's got to stop. That behavior has to stop. But not only does the behavior have to stop, covering it up and ignoring it has to stop. Just start reporting on the facts. And if you do know the facts, speak up about them. And then hopefully, yeah, we can just start to get some sort of movement in the right direction of actual progress. Because at the moment, this is not progress.
No.
This is, I mean, like Lionel Shriver, who's a fantastic writer, she has said, like, the danger thing of being like, if you just say you're progressive and you don't think anything more about that, is that you can progress, you can just walk straight into a ditch. And at the moment, we just progress straight into a ditch. We need to get out of it and actually progress in a positive direction, not, you know, the mayhem that's been happening. And I'm the eternal optimist. I think that this is all really possible and that we can create this great society that is actually diverse and inclusive. But it's going to take actually listening to women and not using our lives as a political game, basically.
And one final question. What would you like to say to transgender people? I'm not talking about transgender rights activists. They're not all transgender. But what would you like to say to transgender people about this issue? Because I believe that they have rights too. And I'm sure you agree.
Yeah, 100%. But I think one of the rights that they actually do have is that they have to know that no human being has ever changed sex. And it's really concerning to me that in the medical industry at the moment, and then the government is putting policies in place, that it makes it illegal to question that. You know, it's just this affirmation method that's happening, and that people are being lied to. And then, you know, they're going onto Twitter, or they're trying to get on apps, and some woman is going, actually, no, you haven't changed sex. Like, that must be confronting to find out if you have been told that it's possible. Like, no human being has ever changed sex. No human being is born in the wrong body. These are nonsense concepts. These are ideological, faith-based concepts. They're being pushed as fact, and really vulnerable people are believing them. And that's cruel. I would say it's borderline evil. So I think that one of the rights that transgender people have is to know the truth and reality, and then make decisions based on that. Because then if having procedures to make you appear as the opposite sex is the best thing that suits you, okay, fine. But then you also are going to have to know that that's not going to mean that you go and get to use female-only spaces. And it doesn't mean that as a male that makes you a lesbian, and that lesbians are going to accept you in their dating pool. So it's understanding what the actual rights are, and what rights that, no, you're not going to have these rights. Or if you think you do, or if you're in a situation where the government has passed laws and you currently do, you're going to come up to really stern opposition from women who don't want that. And I don't think this is being hateful to trans people at all. I think this is actually treating them with respect. Because telling people the truth is treating them with respect. So I'm not going to sit there and sugarcoat things like these people can't handle the truth. Yes, they can. We're all adults here. We should be able to have mature, civil, fact-based conversations. And if you can't, then maybe if you can't have mature adult conversations, maybe making lifelong medical decisions is not a great decision for you to make right now. But if we could have these conversations in good faith, then we could all move forward together. And if they wanted situations like things like trans women only bathrooms or trans men only bathrooms and things like that, there's a lot of women that would gladly work with them on that issue. And we can form alliances and make change. But just screaming bigot and transphobe, no, that jig is up. That's
a great point to end it. So thank you so much for speaking with us, Sall, and thanks to everyone who tuned in either now live or watches this later. Look, I really got a lot of respect for what you're doing, Sall, in trying to defend your rights and the rights of women. And best of luck to Giggle, and I hope that when you do your relaunch, it's really successful, and you don't get into any more trouble. But
sure we will.
you seem like you might get into trouble occasionally. But
yeah.
But best of luck to you, and thanks to everyone for tuning in.
Thanks everyone for listening.